The following program is an independent production, apart from DJ DP Productions. The views, opinions, and ideas of the producers of The Darkest Hour do not necessarily reflect those of the staff of DJ DP Productions, its partners or affiliates. The producers of The Darkest Hour with Amanda Jane of Forget Me Not assume all responsibility for the content of its program. Should you have questions or concerns regarding The Darkest Hour with Amanda Jane, please contact the producers directly. Or you may also contact the staff at Neo Retro FM through email at djdphoenix@protonmail.com. Be sure to include the date of the program and the subject matter you're inquiring about. And now, Neo Retro FM presents The Darkest Hour with Amanda Jane, streamed live from Marysville, Washington.
Before their souls go for tomorrow, we embark on the darkest hour.
Hello everyone, and welcome to The Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Whether it's something in film and writing, or a personal experience, there is something about the experiences of children and the supernatural that have a way of sticking with me. Apparently, I'm not the only one. So tonight, we'll hear from others on this topic and many more. Let's get started, shall we? This was back in March. My mom and I had recently started walking a different part of the neighborhood than we usually did. We live on a popular street and found it easier to keep our distance from others by walking a less populated area of town. This area had a really nice park, currently surrounded by new apartments, a small coffee shop, recently renovated, but on the outskirts of the same area were a few remaining homes. They were very old and had been unoccupied for quite some time. Recently, the city had purchased the area, and they were set to be demolished. The city was planning to build up more apartment, condo-style homes. We decided to walk through that area. We passed by several homes which were fully demolished, with the blueprint-type photo showing what this area would look like in the future. As we rounded the block, we could see that there was still one house completely untouched for the most part. It did seem broken down as remnants were around the house, needing to be demolished for sure, but it just hadn't yet. I was sort of mesmerized by the thing, and then I heard something. Did you hear that? My mom and I both said at the same time. It sounded like a little girl crying, but I didn't hear it any longer. I went to speak, but before I could, my mom shushed me real quick. The little girl was crying again. Maybe louder now? She started to walk towards the house, and I had an overwhelming sensation to grab my mom, so I did. She turned and looked at me. I asked if we could call my dad or the police. She must have thought that was a good idea because she got her phone out and started to dial the police. I could still hear the crying. She could too. I heard her tell the operator that yes, she is still crying at this moment. My mom got off the phone saying the police were on their way, and the operator said not to go in. She walked up towards the house again anyways. I held my breath. Well, this chain link fence has a lock on it anyways, so I guess we'll have to wait for the police, she said. And I finally was able to exhale. I really didn't want her to go in there. Instead, we just sort of stood outside of the place, feeling eerie. My mom every now and again calling out, "Hey honey, we're gonna get you out of there, okay? Don't you worry." The crying had stopped, and now my mom was on the phone with my dad. explaining where we were and if he wanted to meet us, or if not, it was going to probably be a minute. They hung up, and shortly afterwards, we saw 2 police cars pull up and an ambulance. We were shocked to hear laughing coming from the same area that the crying had been coming from. It sounded like the same little girl. We stared at each other for a while, and the EMTs approached us first. My mom trying to explain where the crying was coming from, but also noting that we had just heard laughing. The 2 policemen were standing with us now. They looked over at the house and the chain-link fence surrounding the piece of property. The one officer says to the other that it looks like it's locked and they'll have to cut it. And like that, the various men went back to their vehicles, retrieved some tools, and eventually made their way inside the house. My dad had made his way to us by now, carrying my little brother on his shoulders, my mom asking why he didn't take the car, that my brother didn't need to see this if it was serious. All the while, I'm looking at my little brother. He's smiling and waving, saying, "Hi, hi." I think he's looking at the men in uniform, excited about the ambulance, which looks a lot like his favorite fire truck toy. But he's not. Those men aren't visible right now, so I follow his line of sight. He's looking at the top-story window of the house, clearly waving at someone that, apparently, I can't see. So I ask him, "What you looking at, bub?" And my 4-year-old brother says to me, "My friend. My friend." I tug on my mom's arm, and she and my dad both tell me not to interrupt them when they're talking, which I didn't even realize they were talking because I was laser-focused on whatever was going on with my brother. I say sorry, but then continue anyways. "Mom, did you hear what he just said?" Pointing at my little brother. She stares at me, which shows that no, she didn't. "Okay, well, Bub is waving, saying hi to his friend. Right, Bub?" Switching our attention to my brother. "Right, Bub? She's your friend." And being the perfect little brother that he's always been, he says, Yeah, she my friend." Pointing to the window, my parents both looking that way as well. The police and EMTs are making their way out, which grabs my parents' attention. My dad taking my brother off of his shoulders and telling me to grab him and watch him until they finish up with the police. At this point, I went from being scared to being really interested. The men didn't seem to have anyone with them when they came out of the house, definitely not a little girl. Curious, I asked my little brother if his friend was still there. He looks over, squinting the sun out of his eyes, and laughs, telling me, "Yes, this is her home, sissy. She lives here." I actually sort of laughed in a little bit of amazement. I originally thought the worst, that somebody was actually in there hurt. But now I thought for sure this was maybe a ghost or a spirit of some kind. One that my mom and I could only hear briefly, but no response when we called out, and we didn't see anything. But for some reason, probably because of his age and because he rocks, my little brother could engage with the spirit. My parents motioned me over, so I collected him and I made my way over. The EMTs and policemen were going to their vehicles, tipping their hats at my parents and us. We waved, and my parents proceeded to tell me that they didn't find anyone inside. They searched the entire house, my parents said. "What about upstairs?" I asked. My dad explaining there was no upstairs. "The entire interior of that place has been gutted, honey. No more stairs, so no more upstairs." As he said this, I felt my little brother's hand leave mine. I quickly darted after him along with both my parents. He was at the fence, screaming excitedly, "Ooh, pretty dress. I like your dress." My mom swooped him up, and both of my parents acted like nothing had just happened. And as we walked home, I kept pestering my parents about the whole event, reminding my mom that she heard the crying and laughing too, that it is possible someone was there and we just couldn't see them. Bub could. They weren't interested and were more concerned that it was probably kids playing a prank, and we just didn't see them leave. I knew that wasn't possible. The police had literally cut the fence open just to get inside. Not to mention, how do you explain, "Ooh, pretty dress," when no one else is around? No one wearing a dress. Well, imagination is what I was told. So I decided to drop it with my parents, but that afternoon when I was watching my little brother, I decided that we were going to color. Now, being 4, I wasn't sure that he was going to be able to color a picture of what he saw, but I thought it was worth a try. I grabbed the coloring goods and sat him on the table. I was asking him to draw me a picture, maybe a picture of his new friend. He started to scribble and it wasn't going well. So I let him keep going, but asked if he could tell me what his friend looked like so that I could draw a picture of all 3 of us. This worked much better. Sort of. When I asked what color her hair was, he said white. Pretty much everything was white. And as I started to think that maybe I was crazy and looking into this 4-year-old's imagination too much, I said, "What about her dress, Bub? What did her dress look like? Was it white?" He managed to say yes, that it was white. But then he pointed to one of the coloring books that was on the table and said, "Ooh, like this one, sissy, like this." He was pointing at the Muppets Christmas Carol coloring book, specifically at Miss Piggy, who was dressed in an old-time, frilly white caroler outfit. Wow, I thought to myself, this kid definitely saw himself a ghost. Keeping my promise, I finished the drawing of me, my little brother, and his new friend. My mom and I kept walking that same route for a while. Each time I'd listen for the little girl, but I never did hear her again. All of the houses have since been demolished, and the area is actually not accessible right now. I'm curious what the space will feel and look like when they're through. Does the little girl move on somewhere else? Does she remain there? Or was she ever there at all? I grew up near Tulsa, Oklahoma, and this is a story of the summer of 1977. I was turning 16, and I remember on the last day of school that year, I made a verbal vow out loud to myself that I would never set foot on this nasty, cramped, hot, smelly school bus ever again as I walked off the metal steps for the last time that day. I can remember what I said very well because I was also directing my words at the bus driver, who had just burnt my arm with her Lucky Strike cigarette while turning the metal crank thing that opens the doors. She tells me, "That's why you're supposed to stay seated until the doors open, dear," and pulls away, leaving me at the edge of the cul-de-sac I lived in. That night, I rode my bike to the Admiral Twin Drive-In Theater. It's the drive-in from Francis Ford Coppola's classic, The Outsiders, located right off Route 66. With so much history there, you'd think that's where my encounter takes place. Well, it's not. It was honestly just where I worked, and it was a great job. They let me work overtime, which helped me accomplish my goal midsummer. My goal being that I was going to buy a car. It's actually the car that I bought with that money that would end up being the experience. When I'd saved up enough money to legitimately start my automotive search, I looked through every used car listing that existed. My endless search through small printed descriptions of vehicles accumulated into piles and piles of paper scattered across my room. This must have looked like a pretty desperate sight to my friend Gina. When she stopped by my house one morning, walking through the papers, trying not to ruffle my methodically laid circle of car clippings, Gina tells me that her dad could probably sell me one of his cars for cheap, and that she'd talk to him for me. Though she never flaunted it, Gina's family was loaded. And I mean loaded. Like, it was the first house I ever saw where they had a room filled with beautiful furniture that nobody was allowed to sit on. They moved here from New York when she was in 8th grade. I'd always assumed that he'd gained his money from Wall Street. Her dad, I mean. But I was raised not to ask those kinds of questions, as it's not polite. Money, politics, and religion stay at the doorstep if you want to leave a good impression. I said to Gina, "Yes, please. Hey, I've got a phone right here. Why don't you call him from that?" It was either my almost shouting tone or the kindness and pity Gina had for me that made her pick up the Mint receiver and dial her father's number. The phone rings and he picks up. That's a good sign. Gina says, "Hey, Dad, are you still trying to get rid of those cars?" Then after a couple of seconds, she turns to me and winks with a smile. "How much are you trying to spend?" she asks me. "I have about 700, I say with a small wince. She relays the number through the phone and I hear a muffled mumble back to her. Gina says, "Great, love you, bye," and hangs up. I go, "So what did he say?" She says, "When can you come by to check them out?" Hoping to find just a little bit more of Gina's pity, I say, "How about now? I'll catch a ride with you." Gina laughs. I take that as a yes, so I grab my money from my van's shoebox located under my bed, and I find Gina's car keys so we can go. When we get to her house, we pull in her wrap-around driveway and park the car. Her dad greets us with hugs and says, "So you're finally gonna be driving, huh? You better watch out," in the most dad way ever, and walks us around to the back of the house. His garage is located in the very back of the property. Gina and I never really hung out back there because we're girls, and a big car room doesn't seem all that exciting until you need a car. When Gina's dad opened one of the many garage doors leading in, the automatic lights came on with a soft hum, illuminating 4 beautiful cars. Looking at these shiny chariots, I felt compelled to remind him that I was only working with $700. He spins around and without missing a beat replies, "Don't stress it. My daughter runs with a good circle of friends. You're getting the friends deal." This was no doubt more than a friends deal. I didn't know much about cars or money for that matter, but I knew this was quite a steal. Most of the cars looked like something out of a racing magazine, and I wasn't mad about it. After narrowing my choices down to 2 cars, Gina's dad smiled big and said, "Ah, excellent. What do you say we call your folks? They can help you decide." After talking with my parents about the car, I was frustrated it took so much convincing. My dad touting about handouts and how that was too much car for that kind of money, or what was wrong with the thing. After so long of this, I saw Gina's dad smile and then he gestured to hand the phone over. I asked my dad to speak with her dad, and by the end of the night, I was walking out with the keys to my very own white 1973 Chevy Monte Carlo. It was between that and a 1972 blue Volkswagen Beetle, but clearly my dad's input was final say. Beautiful car. I loved that thing. Gina and I spent all summer driving around in it, taking it all over the state, mainly back roads, putting miles on it like nobody's business. One night, I dropped Gina off and was headed home. I was tired and decided to wrap around and take the highway route home. My parents preferred I took residential streets for speed purposes, and I remember Gina's dad agreeing that I should avoid highways. That they, the cops, were always looking for cars like these, the fast ones, to make a mistake or even just to give them a ticket to prove something. Oh, they hate the ones that can outrun them, he would say. Either way, most teenagers don't listen to their parents, and yeah, they don't even listen to other people's parents either. I usually took the highway when I was in a hurry or when I was tired. I wasn't speeding ever. It just cuts 5 minutes off the whole trip, which can be nice. Also, something about stopping at streetlights in the middle of the night alone in the dark. Yeah, I didn't like that feeling, and I just wanted to get home. So on I went. I had made it almost all the way home before I saw police lights flip on, just as I was making the exit. Even though I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong, my heart was pounding, my palms were sweating. I just really didn't want a ticket, and I didn't want to deal with my parents. The cop taps the window with his pen, motioning for me to roll it down. I get the spiel to hand over my paperwork and sit tight. Still, he isn't telling me what I've done wrong, just to sit tight, don't go anywhere. It feels like decades have passed before the cop is back at my window. He's telling me that my plates don't match my vehicle. He sees that I'm not the registered owner, it's my dad, and he asks where he is and if he can come pick me up. I'm so confused and asking the officer what the problem is. Was it something I did? Is something wrong with the car? He sees that I'm concerned and tells me that he's going to have me hop in his trooper car. Another officer is going to come pick up my car, and when he gets me home, he'll need to have a conversation with my father. On the way to my house, I hear him chattering through his walkie, and I get the impression that maybe what he means by my plates not matching is that the car looks like it's stolen. I don't even know what to think about that, and I'm so tired at this point. Once we pull up to my house, my dad is sitting on the front porch. He must have seen the police car making its way up the long driveway, and, well, he's likely assuming the worst right now. As soon as I get out of the car, I'm hoping that he at least puts together that I'm getting out of the front seat and not the back. I look over at the cop, he motions that I run ahead, and I make my way to the deck. Dad, I promise I didn't do... I'm cut off by my father shooting me a be quiet look. And then he says, "You'll go inside now." Which is exactly what I did. My father wouldn't tell me the details that night. In fact, it would be months before I would hear anything about my car. And suddenly I wasn't allowed to see Gina. School had started again and Gina was nowhere to be found. I no longer had a car. My calls to her house went unanswered. Finally, my parents would have to tell me what was going on. I got a letter in the mail. I almost missed it because it blended in with a huge stack of other stuff, but I recognized the envelope. It was from Gina. It didn't say much, but enough to make me start asking real questions. Kat, I'm so sorry about your car. I'm so sorry about my dad. Mom's so upset, so I know we won't be able to see each other, but thanks for the best summer ever. Inside was a Polaroid of us. Ironically, it was the two of us in the Monte Carlo. I was sad all over again. But I demanded that my parents tell me what she was talking about. Once they did, it wasn't me that I felt bad for anymore, it was Gina. My car wasn't taken away because of stolen plates. My car was part of an ongoing investigation, quite literally connected to a string of murders and mishaps from South New Jersey to parts of New York. The car itself was evidence, which is why none of us were allowed to drive it or touch it once I was pulled over that night. Police were specifically looking for that car, make and model. The last place that it was seen was leaving Arkansas and crossing over to Oklahoma. I remember my father working with the police a little bit. He was able to identify that there were in fact 2 other cars in Gina's father's garage that they were looking for. I believe that they must have actually ended up finding something in those cars, seeing as we were never able to touch them again, or even get any real answers from the police after my father had cooperated. I never got closure on any of this, and I never spoke to Gina again. When I tried to find her years later, no results. It's like she never existed. And if I didn't have this one Polaroid and my parents to back me up, I might just think that Gina and her family never existed. When I was 10 years old, my parents and I lived in my granny's basement, which was a mother-in-law style basement. We had a full kitchen, a small dining area, bathroom, bedroom, living room, and a small den space, which was a room without a door. The den space was mine, and my dad had put up colorful curtains in lieu of the door that didn't exist. Since my parents spent most of the time in the kitchen and their room, and me being 10, this was much cooler than inconvenient. One day, I was getting ready for school. I had just finished breakfast, and I went to the bathroom to wash my face and get dressed. In that bathroom was a bowl-like metallic sink, in which you could see the whole room, the reflection. I washed my face, and while patting it dry, I'm looking into the sink. I find myself locked in place, overtaken by fear. In the sink, I saw the reflection of something standing behind me. It was a huge, black figure, and from what I could tell, these eyes were even darker than the figure itself, and looking right at me through this reflection. I was so petrified, just standing there. All I remember was panic filling my head, taking over any thought that I tried to have. At 10 years old, I didn't have anything to compare it to. I just knew I had never felt this type of fear outside of a nightmare. And this was something far worse than anything I'd seen or felt in a bad dream. I watched it then move to the left where the door was. And as though it were walking in slow motion, it eventually left the bathroom altogether. I was still frozen in place. I truly don't know how long it was until I moved, but it had to have been a while. As I heard from the kitchen my name, it was my mom telling me to hurry up or I was going to miss the bus. I finally got the courage to move and I left the bathroom. I checked the whole house skeptically as I got dressed, and I made my way out to the bus stop. I never saw anything, which I was happy about. I was also happy to be heading off to school. Suddenly, Granny's basement wasn't so cozy. Of course, no one believed me. They blamed it on my imagination, but I know what I saw, and I know that it really happened. So, I thought this would be an appropriate place to share my encounter, since the people here are probably more interested and understanding than most. About 6 or 7 weeks ago, I was walking my dog and decided to take him to the woods directly behind our house. I'd only been back there once or twice, and it was very brief, so I didn't have much time to see anything. As we got past the initial barrage of trees and foliage, I was surprised that it opened up into a giant clearing with a pond and everything. It was like a nature paradise. Imagine a giant circle with trees surrounding you 360 degrees. How I didn't know this was back here beats me, but I had instant regret of not having taken advantage of the space. But this is where the story gets strange. You know how you can get stuck just staring off into nothing? Like you almost sense what's around you, but you just can't move your eyes away, or zoning out. Well, that's what I was doing. It felt nice to just stand there and zone out into the pond. So there I was, dog leash in right hand, zoning. So I know that's how I didn't notice anything before. Not sure why my dog didn't notice anything, but suddenly, this thing was brought into focus. Humanoid in that it seemed comfortable on 2 legs. It was upright. Seemed to have skin, but possibly fur. Either way, it was brown. And looking at me, I froze, hoping my dog would do the same thing. Terrified that he would start barking, but he didn't. He wasn't even acknowledging this thing's presence. I was so grateful. I got that feeling, though, that I was in a very bad situation and I would do anything, not to make it worse. As I tried to focus through the trees to get a better idea of what was looking at me, if I had to judge, I would say it was about 5 feet tall. It made no audible sounds or gestures of any kind, but continued to just stare at me. I remember being so scared and thought, I hope I don't have a seizure episode. I have epilepsy, and too much stimuli and excessive excitement can lead to seizure activity, and that's how frickin' scared I was. As we continued to lock eyes, my fear subsided and was replaced with a cautious wonder of sorts. I can't say what exactly its eyes looked like because it was far enough away from me that if I needed to run, I had a good jump on it. But I knew that it was definitely staring me down, possibly just observing me in the way I was observing it. Even more possibly, I thought, it wants me out of this area. Before I could even make my run for it, the creature had decided to do the same thing, incredibly fast. Luckily, in the opposite direction. I mean, when I saw this thing move, I had seriously underestimated 2 things: its size and its speed. When the thing moved to run, it was easily 7 feet tall, possibly I saw it kneeling. And the speed. I would have been screwed if it had decided to take off in my direction. Directly after the event in the woods, it was like my perception of reality changed drastically. I am as enlightened as I am scared, confused but clear. There's something about those woods, something beautiful, but something terrifying.
Jerry's here, and he brought his guitar to the party.
Jerry makes me sick.
Let's just go to a commercial break.
Okay.
Neo Retro FM, live from Olympia, Washington. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Modern music programming. NeoRetroFM.com. Hi everyone, Amanda Jane here. Taking a moment to talk to you about something my husband Ryan and our band, Forget Me Not, are doing this summer. We're partnering with Foundation ESD and their Nourishing Network program to help families in need all summer. You can help support too. It just takes streaming our music all summer long as we continue to donate 100% proceeds to the foundation. Visit conductedbyforgetmenot.com for more information and join us in making No Student Hungry a reality. To learn more about the Foundation ESD and their various programs, please visit foundationesd.org or conductedbyforgetmenot.com.
Oh no, Jerry broke a string. Looks like we have to get back to the show.
I've never been more glad to have a bear nearby. My family recently bought a beautiful but overgrown piece of land in the Kootenays of British Columbia, Canada. It's a wonderful place, but my dad had been a bit frustrated with the amount of work it would take to make the place really livable. I thought it was strange that the previous owners seemed to be in a rush to sell the land, but I left it up to the uneven ground and abundance of plants in the area. My family brought their trailer to the land and were staying in it, while I had set up a small tent nearby since there wasn't enough room for me. Soon after we started staying there, my dad and I were comfortably sitting around our fire pit, stargazing and listening to the sounds of the land, when we started to hear the shrieks of something that was certainly inhuman, but also unlike any animal either of us had ever heard. It was a shrill, yet guttural growl that was extremely drawn out and loud. My first guess was that a bear or cougar got cornered, but listening more closely, I quickly crushed that assumption. I started to distinguish the growl of a small bear, but that wasn't the source of the strange shriek. It soon started to sound like a bear was cornering something, and the threatened creature was trying to make a last-ditch escape while screaming in pain. Now, I know you're probably thinking, must have been a cougar or something, but I've heard a cougar in a fight before. This was not a cougar. Its shrieks and howls almost sounded demonic. Soon after the noises stopped, my dad and I both decided it would be best to head to bed. While laying in my tent, I started to hear the unmistakable sound of a large creature roaming around our site. After approaching, I heard it settle into place, almost like it was sitting down or getting comfortable. I started to worry that the unidentifiable creature from earlier was stalking us, until I worked up the courage to peek out my tent window. In the spot I'd heard the creature approach from, I saw not a horrifying monstrosity, but a beautiful black bear. I would normally be afraid upon seeing this, except I made eye contact with the bear and felt an overwhelming sense of safety. I know it sounds crazy, but it almost felt like the bear was watching over us to protect us from something. Soon after noticing the bear, I heard that blood-curdling screech of the unidentifiable creature, much closer now. When the bear heard this, it tensed up, brought itself to its feet, and began to growl menacingly. Only a moment after the bear began to growl, I heard a much larger creature than the bear run off in the opposite direction. I swung my head to see where the noise was coming from and got a glance of an incredibly large deer-like animal. I didn't get a good look at it, but I remember seeing thin, skeletal, long, pale arms and legs that ended with hooves. It was covered in a very dark, blood-like substance, implying maybe that it had been injured recently. When I saw this, my breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't force myself to look away. I saw the tree sway and break where it was running, and then it stopped a far distance away from our land and let out one more shriek. The few birds that were awake in the area flew away in fear, and I shuddered. I looked back to the bear, and it was once again sitting, looking at me with its kind of protective eyes. I've never been more grateful to have a bear living by. And I no longer fear them, but I respect them. When I was a kid, I thought most of these experiences I had were nightmares, but as I've gotten older and talked to people through the years, I'm more inclined to think that these were real experiences or visions that were maybe only able to be experienced because I was much younger, more susceptible at that age. I'm still curious if there are even more people with these experiences and what their theories are. For years as a kid, between 5 and 8, I had nightmares of literal 2-foot, 3-foot stick figures, black beings with no features, typically what you'd see somebody draw, darting around my house. It's weird because it's kind of a blur between reality or extremely vivid dreams. I say this because, yes, I would see them in my dreams, but I'd also intentionally or unintentionally wake myself up and see the same figures. I could move, get up, go to the bathroom, turn on lights, feel it when I would pinch myself. I wasn't terrified or anything. I think I was young enough to where I was highly curious what these things were. Why didn't they want to play with me? Why did they keep hiding? As soon as I'd look at them, they'd dart at quick speeds behind furniture. Like they were always around but didn't want to be spotted. Like I said, at first I thought this was just some weird 1980s subconscious memories, until I recently listened in the last year or so to expanded perspectives and other people's childhood encounters with stick figures. But wait, it gets weirder. We also had strange poltergeist activity in the house. For example, St. Patrick's Day, when I had set a silly leprechaun trap in the basement. I remember these events vividly, and even found them in journals. I detail that they aren't much taller than myself, or maybe aren't taller than me, that I see them hiding from me, that I'm going to try and catch one. Last but not least, for now, I think I experienced one of those weird fairy parties they talk about in expanded perspectives. When I was about 7, my mom was putting me to bed in my basement room, and I heard in the next room what sounded like glasses clinking, people laughing and chattering. Just for a couple seconds. My dog, who was on the foot of the bed, lifted his head and he woofed at the room a moment later. Surprise, my mom hadn't heard anything. So, I sort of wonder if kids aren't more susceptible to fae or the unknown, and these stick figures, like semi-formed representations of those beings. There were just so many things, weird things that happened in that 1970s Wyoming home that I couldn't really attribute to anything else or explain. Otherwise, I had a pretty normal childhood. Despite being emotionally sensitive and a perceptive kid, which I still am, my parents never encouraged this kind of stuff, and for the most part, I kept it to myself. So, in short, or long, I guess I'm wondering if anyone's ever had stick figure dreams or experiences with fairy-like creatures as a kid, and I wonder what your theories are. This happened back in 2009. I was living alone, just found a nice apartment that was near a shopping center I'd started working at. The place was rather new, and though not super cheap, you really couldn't beat the location and the gated community feel. I had been living in the place for almost 6 months. I remember because I was about to be given the option to sign a year lease or continue month to month. I woke up one morning, grabbed coffee, showered, all of the morning stuff. While I was getting ready to actually head out for work, turning off the lights, unplugging things, I heard what I thought was my cat, until I saw my cat was asleep on the couch. And just before chalking it up to that, I heard crying coming from my bedroom. I went into my bedroom and I saw nothing. But a couple of moments later, the crying continued. I searched and searched. Nothing. I could still hear the crying. So confused, I sat down and closed my eyes. I decided this was either coming from a neighbor very close to my wall or my bedroom closet. So I beelined it for my closet. The moment I opened it, the crying stopped. It didn't come back. I went to work, confused but not willing to be late. A couple of weeks pass. I forget about the whole situation, and then the crying started again. It kept happening, and I was able to observe something. Whenever I opened my closet, while I heard the crying, it stopped. With this observation and a growing sense of unease, I told my friend about the crying. She said that we should look and see if anything ever happened in my apartments, bad or creepy. We couldn't find anything that pointed to crime or bad stuff when searching the apartment names. But then we got the idea to put the address of the building and see if that brought anything up. Then we saw it. The apartments, they used to be called Sandy's Court. 2 years prior, in 2007, the headline: Murder-suicide claims life of 5, including 4-year-old child. I had never read something and felt ill, but that's how me and my friend felt now. There's no way of knowing which apartment this happened in, or if the crying I heard so clearly was indeed related, but either way, I couldn't ignore the information. The part that really stuck with me was the date of the article was July, which was the month I first started hearing the crying. I asked my friend that we look up how to cleanse the space and take a moment of silence for the victims. It just felt like the right thing to do. What also felt right was moving. I was grateful that I was essentially led to this information, because though I wasn't harmed, I don't think being surrounded by that kind of energy all the time can be good for someone. Needless to say, I didn't sign a lease. I found myself another place, and I was sure to Google the address first. I'm not even sure I'll be able to explain this right. I've tried before, but in writing, maybe it will be different. Keeping in mind I'm explaining something I don't really have an explanation for. I have 3 kids, and they're pretty active. Last night, they'd all asked to go outside and play in the yard. I said yes, and as they headed back, I had to go to the bathroom. In doing so, I have to pass the boys' bedroom to get there. While walking that way, I could see that they left the light on top of the dresser that was against the wall shared with the bathroom. As I walked past the door, something big flew past the light, making a large shadow with wings. Not like bird wings would in a silhouette, but much more like large bat wings. Very large. It literally scared me that I jumped backwards and hesitated walking by the doorway again. But then I heard some of the toys shifting around and the dresser's drawers being closed. So I felt like maybe one of the boys had snuck past me somehow. This made me feel okay to pop my head in, where I saw that no one was in there. Standing there, I saw a shadow again, this time begin to fill the room, the entire wall. The intensity was surreal. I found myself actually cowering to the ground to avoid this invisible creature that seemed to be making a very real and very visible shadow. I stood up and made my way to the door, feeling adamant that this couldn't be real, but feeling what felt like real fear. I was conflicted and decided to get out of the room. As I did, I noticed these toys my son has. They're these Japanese build-it-yourself toys, giant robots. They come in various sizes. What was weird or out of place, the one that normally is up on the shelf too high for my kids to reach, was down on the dresser, away from the other 3 that were on the shelf above. Now, normally I would just assume that my son was fixing it or something, but it just didn't add up. I'd been inside that room all day doing laundry, putting clothes in that same dresser just a few minutes before the boys had gone outside. My son hadn't been in that room, and my other son cannot reach them without breaking something or himself. But there it was, sitting neatly on the dresser. So I left it there and I went outside, casually asking my kids if they'd been moving the Gundam toys, they're called, or fixing them, and instantly my son was concerned that someone broke it and he had to go run and check, saying that he hadn't touched it, since we'd put it on the shelf. Now, when he returned from their room, he was a little bit annoyed, asking why I was making stuff up about the Gundams, because they were all in their rightful place. And then I asked about the one on the dresser, and he replies back to me, "No, you put it back just fine. Thank you for being gentle." Instantly, I think, what the hell? I cannot reach the shelf without a chair or a stepladder, which neither of those things are in that room, so whatever moved the toy made me look like I was playing some kind of boring, lame prank. So, what the heck was in their room? And how was it big enough to cast a shadow that darkened the whole room? Other strange thing? My dog has not gone into the boys' room since this event. And the latest development, my boys sleeping in the living room, which started 2 nights ago, saying they're hearing scraping and scratches in the wall behind the dresser. Yeah, I have some work to do, but thought I'd share these happenings with you. Updates forthcoming. Or wouldn't that be great if I had nothing to update or report? Let me know if you have any idea what it is I'm dealing with here. I'm more than willing to take advice at this point. When I was about 12, my family moved into a home that was built on the land of an old care home. It was a literal home that was converted into small living quarters for older folks and their caretakers. That property, for the most part, was torn down just about 2 years before my parents had the rest of it restored and additional housing added on. Our family officially moved into the house in 2010, and by the end of the first year of living there, we would have all encountered something that we couldn't explain. Except my dad. He refuses to admit anything out of the ordinary has taken place. He's not a believer in ghosts, spirits, or anything like that. He's got an explanation for everything, and when he doesn't, he'll make one up. For most of us, and most of the time, it was just little things, like feeling scared when entering a specific room. Mine was one of the worst. In fact, so much so that early on I moved rooms. My old room becoming the now office, which my dad was the only one that seemed to use it. You would often see something out of the corner of your eye when passing that room. Most of the time it looked like a black cat running across the floor or jumping on furniture. But we didn't have a cat. In fact, we didn't have any animals because my older sister and I were allergic. The scariest thing that we experienced was seeing our dad in places that he wasn't. At least this was the scariest for me. To give an example of this, the bedrooms and bathrooms were all upstairs with the kitchen, and the basement or lowest level had a family room, bonus room, with the laundry room. I was downstairs watching TV with both of my parents. I remember I really didn't want to miss whatever we were watching, so as soon as it went to commercial, I raced up the stairs to use the bathroom. As I passed the office, I saw my dad. He was sitting at the computer in the dark. I could see his face only from the glow of the computer screen. My whole body went cold. I couldn't believe how cold he looked as well. I ran to the end of the hall, flipped on the lights, and when I ran back to the doorway, the room was empty. I used the bathroom, but that night I slept on the couch downstairs with the TV on all night. My mom said she saw my father at their bedroom window when she'd gotten home early from work one day. She thought it was strange as his truck wasn't in the driveway, but she figured he must have parked it in the garage. They waved at each other as she got out of the car. She walked inside, hollering about dinner, as she put it, but heard no response. The house was empty, us kids at school, my dad still at work. My older sister had experienced the worst, as she would tell you. She doesn't feel like anything positive ever came from these happenings, events, experiences. When I refused to sleep in the now office, my older sister and I shared a room for a while. When we did, she was woken up for no apparent reason in the night, on multiple occasions, to see a dark figure standing at the end of my bed. The first couple times it happened, she thought nothing of it. Perhaps it was our parents. But one time, she called out to it. When she saw it shift, she noticed that it didn't have any features or clothing. It was just a dark, vibrating shadow. And then it disappeared. After the second time, she told me about it. I believed her. But we really didn't know what to do or what to think. The next time that she would see this thing, it would be standing directly over her. As soon as she moved to meet its eyes, it was suddenly in the far corner of our room. She struggled to wake me up, and when she did, we could both feel that there was something in the corner of the room. She claims she never saw the figure or anything else after that, and I felt my encounters were very few and far between the older that we got. But one thing we both agree on, though we can't explain it, is that for the duration of living in the house, we were drawn to that area. That corner of the room was intoxicating for both of us. If we played in that room, we found ourselves in that corner. We even at one point made our parents move our beds to that side of the room. I remember one night, years later, my sister had packed a bag of stuff to bring on vacation with her and some friends. The next morning, when no one was awake, she found everything she'd put in her bag scattered across the floor of her bedroom. Her makeup, hairspray bottle, clothing, everything, thrown everywhere. Everyone in the house woke up to her crying, and we all saw the wreckage. My dad tried to say that she'd done it herself, which just drove her into further hysterics. I knew that that wasn't true. She was super excited for this trip, and now she was going to be late. All of her hard work the night before just, poof, start over. I helped her pack her bag, and she told me that she wasn't going to come back to this house, at least not that room, ever. We were all but 14 and 16, so she didn't really have much of a choice. Like most events, though, the horror of it all seemed to pass. We rarely talked about the occurrences outside of immediately when they happen. It was like an unspoken rule that we had. I didn't feel all the encounters were negative, though. We had some really nice encounters, too. When my youngest sister started getting better at talking, she kept saying that she could see my great-granddad. He died before she was born, and no one had spoken about him in front of her. When my mom showed a picture of him in his 70s, my little sister didn't have a clue who it was, saying, "No, that's not him." But when she dug out a picture of him when he was much younger, my little sister knew exactly who it was, saying, "Yes, Papa Lenny," which is what my mom called her great-granddad Leonard. I also had a nice encounter just a few months ago. My granddad died back in May, which was devastating for us all as he was an amazing granddad. Even though most of our lives he was restricted to a chair, it didn't hold him back from being the most fun granddad around. I was walking down the stairs, and just as I was halfway down, I could smell him. A mix of his aftershave and just him. I was overtaken by the feeling of comfort and warmth. It made me so happy. I knew that he was there, watching over us. Even with all these experiences, it's hard to tell what any of it really was or is. I can't explain it, but I know these events existed. And I can't help but feel it's tied to that house or land somehow. Either way, I'm grateful for the moments that have brought us joy, and ever so curious about the ones that brought less than joy. Well, friends, it's the end of the hour. The darkest hour, that is. A big thanks to everyone for sharing, and to everyone for listening. Be sure to join me every Friday night at 11 p.m. right here on neoretrofm.com. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on Reddit, Amanda Jane FMN. Stay spooky.